Hello, Debate High. Today we are doing part 3 of our mini-series on democracy. In fact, we're going to be continuing our discussion on Alexis De Tocqueville. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. In our previous part, we discussed the first issue Alexis saw with democracy, being that it would breed materialism. So, without further ado, let's talk about the second issue. Alexis De Tocqueville noticed how democracy would breed envy and shame. In a chapter titled Why Americans Are So Often Restless in the Midst of Their Prosperity, he traveled across America and noticed how so many people were relatively well off and lived a very comfortable life. However, amidst this nation filled with prosperous and apparently successful people, everyone just wanted more. They were never content with what they had, and they agonized at the sight of someone else having what they wished. Tocqueville, having the gift of being an outsider looking in, developed an analysis between dissatisfaction and high expectation, between envy and equality. In fact, let's take a look at a passage from Democracy in America so we can further analyze this point. So, it reads, "When all the prerogatives of birth and fortune have been abolished, when every profession is open to everyone, an ambitious man may think it is easy to launch himself on a great career and feel that he has been called to no common destiny. But this is a delusion which experience quickly corrects. When inequality is the general rule in society, the greatest inequalities attract no attention. But when everything is more or less level, the slightest variation is noticed. That is the reason for the strange melancholy often haunting inhabitants of democracies in the midst of abundance, and that disgust with life sometimes gripping them even in calm and easy circumstances. In France, we are worried about the increasing rate of suicides. In America, suicide is rare, but I am told that madness is commoner than anywhere else." With that being said, Tocqueville did not want to return to the old way of life present in Europe. In fact, he acknowledged that democracies enjoyed a higher quality of life. That's what Alexis admired about American culture, the idea that everybody was at least theoretically equal and could achieve anything they wanted, a stark difference from their contemporaries in Europe, who did not question their rights and endured harsh mistreatment in the upper class, deeming it to be a natural and normal part of their social order. In the words of Tocqueville himself, "I never met a citizen too poor to cast a glance of hope and envy towards the pleasures of the rich." The School of Life puts out a great piece examining this very sentiment. This is an excerpt. "The different conceptions of poverty held by members of aristocratic and democratic societies was particularly evident," Tocqueville felt, "in the attitude of servants to their masters. In aristocracies, servants often accepted their fates with good grace. They could have, in Tocqueville's words, high thoughts, strong pride, and self-respect. In democracies, however, the atmosphere of the press and public opinion relentlessly suggested to servants that they could reach the pinnacles of society, that they could become industrialists, judges, scientists, or presidents. Though this sense of unlimited opportunity could initially encourage a surface of cheerfulness, especially in young servants, and though it enabled most talented or luckily among them to fulfill their goals, as time passed, as the majority failed to raise themselves, Tocqueville noted that their mood darkened and bitterness took hold and choked their spirits, and that their hatred of themselves and their masters grew fierce." Tocqueville noticed a third issue with democratic government: the tyranny of the majority. In theory, the majority could be hostile to the minority. The majority could oppress them with their vote. They could elect leaders that pursue their own interest. They could erect social systems that hinder the minority. However, this would seem to be unlikely, since democracies naturally produce an aggressive leveling instinct, which seemed to put down anyone who seems to be getting above themselves. In America, it was even seen as a civic duty to preserve the equal standing of people. This, he thought, was part of the natural price one could expect for living in a democracy. However, of course there are outliers. Civil rights were still not present in early America. Racism, sexism, and homophobia were prevalent. And even now, in our current day and age, racism, sexism, and homophobia is still a thing. We must never be silent and never be complicit and always speak out and fight for civil rights for everyone. Fourth thing Tocqueville found problematic was how democracies seemed to turn against authority. Tocqueville saw how democracies encouraged the idea of equality so much that it could potentially lead to unwanted consequences. In Tocqueville's own words, the democratic government advocates in the human heart a depraved taste for equality, which always impels the weak to want to bring the strong down to their level. This almost sounds ludicrous today. We tend to believe that equality is unquestionably good, and without fault, almost perfect. But it's not that simple. Tocqueville recognized an issue that is still present and arguably stronger today, 185 years later. In the United States, people who were less educated, less skillful, and less experienced refused to defer to their peers who did possess these qualities, and would handle things objectively better. He believed that Americans have an unwillingness to bow before any authority. They refuse to think that someone else can be smarter or more apt at something than them. It was apparent to Alexis that some people are just smarter, more skilled, and talented than others, and that their voices should be listened to with special care. He thought that, for better or for worse, democracy is biased towards mediocrity. The final thing Tocqueville observed about democracy was how it undermines the freedom of the mind. That's not to say that Americans did not participate in political and philosophical discussions. He observed the opposite, and claims that in few places could one find less independence of mind and true freedom of discussion than in America. So, if it's not political discussion that is being suppressed by democracy, what exactly is? To answer this question, I must defer to an article from School of Life. It states, "Trusting that the system was fair and just, Americans simply gave up their independence of mind and put their faith in newspapers and so-called common sense. The skepticism of Europeans towards public opinion had given way to a naive faith of the wisdom of the crowd." Despite the critical things Tocqueville says about democracy in the United States, he became a convert of the American way of life. Also, it turns out common sense is not in fact so common, and it's quite useful in life to be skeptical of what people say. Now, being skeptical does not mean rejecting everything. Of course, we must listen to people who have expertise in their field. In fact, let's listen to one right now. In the words of John Keane, a professor of politics at the University of Sydney, Alexis De Tocqueville began to talk of a great democratic revolution, now sweeping the world from its American heartlands. He was persuaded that the advent of democracy as a governing power in the world's affairs is universal and irresistible. It was at hand. He became convinced that the time was coming where democracy would triumph in Europe, as it was doing in America. The future was America. It was therefore imperative to understand its strengths and weaknesses, he thought. In essence, Alexis de Tocqueville was a completely fresh and innovative perspective of what a democracy is, what it could be, how it's going to interact with our culture, and how we should best prepare for it. His interpretations of democracy as a way of life is groundbreaking to say the least. It has changed how we view government and how government shapes our culture. Forever, we shall understand that government, culture, and society are interlinked and highly influence each other. I highly recommend you read his works and do further research upon him. We have now finished our discussion on Alexis de Tocqueville. We are going to end today's part. We thank you so much for watching Debate High and your continuous support in our mission of providing free educational content forever and for you. Remember, Debate High is a student-led, student-oriented organization. Please check out the rest of our videos. If you so choose, share them with your debate members, your debate team, your debate coach, or anybody who has a vague interest or high interest in debate, whether they just like the philosophy, whether they like the competitive edge that they get when they learn how to articulate an argument. With that being said, thank you so much for watching Debate High. We'll catch you in the next one.